It was 1996 in a small urban town on the outskirts of South Manchester in the UK. I was at a small shopping centre surrounded by derelict Victorian cotton mills. It was a very poor town. With that brief description out of the way, it was late September. In the town centre, there was, and still is, an area that we called the Bear Pit. It resembled a very tiny coliseum. Many shoppers used to sit there on the circular steps. In the center was a small pedestal where a regular homeless guy used to beg, sleep, and sit there talking to himself. He was a harmless chap, yet very smelly. This particular September in 1996, my mom and I sat on these steps eating a pastry from the local bakery. While we sat there, we tried to decide which shops to visit next. We overheard a few others talking about how this guy, or tramp as most referred to him, had been asleep there for hours. My mom and I went and looked around at the shops for a while, then we decided to sit on the bare steps for a while before getting the bus home. After a short amount of time, we saw some magpies landing on the guy and then flying off. My mom said to me, "Do you think he's okay?" But we didn't want to check because he smelled so bad. I think that's the reason nobody else wanted to check either. Within a few minutes, many more magpies landed on him and started pecking at his face, literally taking out pieces of flesh from him. There must have been around 20 other people sitting there on those circular steps, and they all started shouting and screaming in horror. A few of us braved it and went to look at the guy. The poor man had barely any face left. He'd been pecked away by the birds, or so it seemed, because his face was not pointed directly at us. Nobody had mobile phones back then, so the only thing we could do was look for our local policeman. There used to be many patrolling around back then. Once a policeman turned up and saw this poor dead man, he vomited and radioed through to the necessary people. It was a horrific sight. We all left very disturbed, and both my mom and I have never viewed magpies the same way. I'm not sure if I articulated this story very well, but it is true, and it stayed with me all these years. I was only 13 years old back then. If you ever see a magpie land on someone you assume is asleep, they're not asleep. This happened in the late 90s when I was 10 years old. I grew up in a small town in America. That's as much detail as I'm going to give about the actual location. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night. Kids played outside until the streetlights came on, and nobody worried about it. Crime was incredibly rare. In fact, I don't think there was so much as a break-in. The closest thing to crime would have been occasional mischief from the older kids, maybe some vandalism, but that was really it. However, there was one event that shook our little town to its core, and it's something I'll never forget. There was a couple who lived next door to us. They were in their mid-40s and had no kids. They kept to themselves mostly, but they were always friendly when we saw them outside. They had a dog named Marty who would sometimes come over to our yard and play with our dog, and we would chat with the couple while the dogs played. I wouldn't say they were good friends with my parents or me, but we definitely knew them. One day, we noticed that we hadn't seen the couple, or Marty, for a few days. At first we didn't think much of it. Maybe they had gone on vacation or something. Usually we would know when people were away though, so it was weird. As the days went on, my parents became more concerned. It was not normal to go that long without seeing them. Eventually, the police got involved and started investigating. They searched the couple's house and found Marty alone. I heard he was thin and dehydrated, but otherwise he was fine. Their cars were still in the driveway, and there was no sign of forced entry. Police questioned neighbors, friends, and family members, but no one had any information about where the couple could be. As the investigation dragged on, rumors started to circulate around town. Some people speculated that the couple had run away together. Others thought they might have been involved in some kind of criminal activity and had fled to avoid being caught. But nobody knows for sure. Some of my friends had really wild ideas, like that they were abducted by aliens, or that they were aliens. I never believed any of that, though. For me and my family, the whole thing was terrifying. We had always felt safe in our little town, but the disappearance of our neighbors made us realize that anything can happen anywhere. My parents started locking the doors at night, and I became more wary of strangers. Years went by, and the case remained unsolved. The couple's house sat empty and abandoned for years, a constant reminder of what happened. Marty was eventually adopted by another family just down the street, and he came to visit us like before. As I grew up and moved away from my hometown, I never forgot about the couple who had disappeared. Every once in a while, I would do a Google search to see if there had been any updates on the case, but there never were. My parents still live in that house, although they're planning on downsizing. I still visit at least a few times per year, and whenever I pass that house, I feel creeped. I still have no idea what happened, or if anyone in town was involved. For all I know, it could have been anyone. One of my teachers, a friend's parent, or uncle. I really don't know. It made me question everything, and it's still terrifying to this day. I'm a 39-year-old female, and this was back when I was 22. I'm from a small town on Long Island. I was always told by my parents growing up to never get in a car or go anywhere with strangers. I was riding with my brother Michael in a not-so-nice part of town. We stopped at a gas station. I got out to have a cigarette, and he went in to pay for the gas. My brother locked the doors, I guess out of habit. I was standing beside the car because I didn't want to smoke in his car. A man that was older, maybe somewhere in his 40s, was next to his car. He asked me if I could help him with something. I asked what. He said,
"Can you put your foot on the gas? I'm having trouble with something, and I want to see something."
I immediately got a bad vibe. My gut said no. I was unsure of what to say, so I said, "No, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable." I then tried to open my brother's car door so I could see if I could get in. I then realized that the car was locked. I've never felt so unsafe in my entire life. It was just a bad feeling. I was so freaked out and looking around for my brother when another man walked up to him and said, "I'll help you." I watched as he got into the man's car and put his foot on the gas. I heard him say, "There's nothing wrong with your car." I right away started to freak out. This whole time, I was waiting for my bro to come out of that gas station. It felt like hours. I should have just went in and got him. It would have made sense, but I was kind of frozen in place at this point. After that man tried his gas and nothing was wrong with his car, it seemed to be a setup. The man who owned the car tried to act confused because the whole scene was super shady. When my brother came out, I couldn't have been more happy to see him. I told him what happened, and he said, "Smart. I'm glad you didn't do anything you'd probably regret later." Then he said it sounded like I was almost kidnapped. I felt so uneasy for the rest of the night. I didn't see any reason to go to the police because nothing actually happened, and luckily I wasn't harmed. I did mull it over in my head about what would have happened if he grabbed me. I'm a small petite female, 5'2" and 110 pounds. You really gotta have guts to do that though, and just not care with all the bystanders around. However, Long Island at the time wasn't the type of place where people saved each other. They at most would have taken a license plate number and called the police. This was 2006, so not everyone had cell phones either like today. Although most people did, I still had a flip phone. Even if someone did report it and something did happen, it may be too late. Trafficking is real. I'm just glad I was okay and unharmed. This happened a long time ago. I was 16 years old, and it was the summer before 10th grade. It was the year 2008. I grew up in the country. The nearest town was 20 minutes away, and it was only a few thousand people. That's where most of my friends lived. There wasn't even a high school there. They bussed us out to a slightly larger town for that. It was a real hassle, and we never got along with the kids from the larger town. so we were happy when it was summer vacation. That way we could keep to ourselves. Like I said, we didn't like to leave our area, so my friends and I would often go camping in the woods that surrounded our town. We'd been going there with our parents since we were really young, but as we got older, it was one of our favorite things to do. On this occasion, I went with my two friends Tyler and Russ, who were brothers. I brought my own tent, but Tyler and Russ shared one. We packed our bags and headed out early in the morning. We knew the woods well, so we didn't need a map or a guide. We just wanted to spend some time away from home and have some fun. We hiked for a few hours until we found the perfect spot to set up camp. It was a small clearing near a stream, surrounded by trees. This was a spot we'd used before. We weren't exactly discovering anything new, just out for a bit of fun. We started a fire and set up our tents. We had brought plenty of food and snacks, and we were excited to spend the night eating s'mores and telling ghost stories. We had also brought a few firecrackers to mess around with. You're not supposed to use them in the area because of forest fires, but we were always careful. As the night wore on, we heard some strange noises in the distance. We shrugged it off as just the sound of the woods, but then we heard footsteps coming closer to our campsite. We all tensed up and turned our faces in the direction of the noise. Suddenly, a man emerged from the darkness. He was tall, with deep inset eyes and a ragged coat. He looked like he hadn't showered in a long time. He approached us and introduced himself as Frank. We were all taken aback, but we didn't want to be rude. We offered him some food and a place to sit by the fire, but we were really hoping he would leave. We chatted for a while, and he seemed fine, but as the night wore on, he started to get too comfortable. He kept asking us questions about our family and where we lived. It started to feel like an interrogation. At one point, I refused to answer one of his questions, and he got pretty upset with me. It was quite jarring. We tried to brush it off and keep the conversation light, and eventually he took off. We were all really uncomfortable, though. We spoke quietly for the rest of the night. I was scared that he was still lurking around and listening to us, and that if we said anything, he might get angry. After an hour, we calmed down. I figured he was far away by then. Who has the patience to wait silently in the woods for an hour just to scare some kids? We went to bed at around 1 a.m. I went to my tent, a small single-person tent, and Tyler and Russ went to their tent, which was big enough for at least 5 people. Not long after I laid down, maybe 20 minutes after, I heard footsteps around the campsite. I thought it was just one of my friends getting up to go to the bathroom. I was a little paranoid though, so I poked my head out. I didn't see anything at first. My tent's door was facing the fire pit, and the other tent was in the opposite direction. I almost gave up and went back to sleep, but I was a little too curious. I got out of my tent and crouched down behind it. Then I slowly peeked my head over the top of my tiny tent. I could see Tyler and Russ's tent now, and there was someone standing next to it. It was Frank from before. It was dark, but his outline was unmistakable. I couldn't tell if he saw me or not, or even which direction he was facing, but I knew it was him. Tyler and Russ were way shorter. He started moving closer to their tent, and I heard him unzipping the door. I could hear movement from within the tent. Then Russ said, "What's up, dude?" I figured he thought it was me opening the zipper, and I shouted, "It's not me. Get your gun." None of us had a gun, unfortunately, but I thought it would be enough to scare the guy off. I was right. The man bolted into the woods as soon as I said that. Tyler and Russ came out. Russ had his flashlight. We looked around for a while, and it seemed the man was gone. We then blew off a few firecrackers, hoping he would think the sound was a gunshot. We were careful not to say anything about the pretend gun, just in case he was listening. We sat up for the rest of the night together, but the man never came back. In the morning, we hiked out and went home to tell our parents. The police got involved, but the man was never found. We kept camping in the woods for years afterwards, and we never had a problem like that again. To this day, I don't know who that guy was or what he was going to do to us.